Hello out there. Welcome everybody to the next episode of AutoCrit Live. I'm here with Gareth, who's in his Fabio look.
Good day. I've been working out.
Yeah, it makes sense working that core. And speaking of core, watch that segue. We're going to talk about a core ability you need to have, and that is writing a good synopsis. And specifically, what are things that you don't want to avoid when you do a synopsis? What are some sins, as we call them, bad practices that can get you in trouble in a hurry? But let's go down to the details here, Gareth. What are we talking about when we're even talking about a synopsis? What is it used for?
Yeah, synopsis is a very specific thing. You often find people kind of getting confused. That could be, I guess, sin number one is kind of confusing entirely what a synopsis is. Um, a synopsis, you'll generally be asked for one. It's a very good thing to be asked for your synopsis, actually.
Yes,
When you get to that
you're on the
point.
right track.
Yeah, you'll usually have made a little pitch, a little bit of outreach to somebody, and if they seem relatively interested in your work, they'll say, "Send me a chapter or send me a few chapters and a synopsis." Your synopsis, simply put, is a full written breakdown of the story. We'll get into some of the things that, as we say here, the little sins, which are the mistakes you could make in actually writing that story breakdown, which means it's not quite as exciting as it is. So, well, we call these sins here today. We are going to be a bit positive about it because it's things that will make your synopsis better.
Yes. So just yes, things you want to avoid, but we're going to tell you the right way to go about things so that you avoid committing any of these sins. Because certainly we don't want to do that. Because to Garrett's point, by the time you get to the synopsis point, you're on the right track. So this is where you want to really have all your ducks in a row. So let's see what we got here. We've got people from California and Hawaii, and somebody's buried under kittens in Fargo, which I thought was pretty funny.
I was going to say,
Uh,
if you're Lori, you should have your kittens in a row.
I know, right? It sounds cozy and sinister at the same time when you say buried under kittens. I just love that juxtaposition. She's a writer, I can tell. Northern Arizona, Mobile, Alabama. I like this from the fringe of the middle of nowhere. So apparently from Tatooine, Texas, East Tennessee, South Africa, Ottawa, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Rhode Island. Awesome, fantastic. Well, while we're going through, if you have any questions, those of you who are here live, feel free to put them there in the chat because we will address them. Or if there's any particular mistakes that you might be concerned about or you think you've committed, feel free to throw that into, the wisdom of the crowd. But we're not going to dilly dally here. We're going to get right into things that you want to be concerned about. One thing that you should do is you should check for guidelines. Now, it's I would say that it's super typical for them to be that particular about a synopsis, but you never really know. There are sometimes agents or editors or whoever's asking for your synopsis that might have a specific format you want to follow, and this is just a good rule of thumb whenever you're having some sort of professional interaction with anybody in the industry, because you certainly don't want to get something wrong technically or give them the wrong style or something like that.
It is. It's always a good one first because as much as you may know, or I guess with some of these people as may that are asking for things that you think you know, it's like, well, I know how to do a synopsis. This is perfect. I'll get that over there. Is just always check number one for exactly what they're asking you for. Now, 99% of the time they will simply say, send me a synopsis, in which case they mean a standard synopsis kind of thing that we'll talk about here.
Mhm.
But watch out, because if they ask for something specific in that request, make sure you fulfill that.
And also, speaking to that, make sure they're asking for your synopsis because if they're not,
That's true. Yeah.
if they're not, and you're just shooting them synopsis, no, that's not going to go well for you. There's a time and a place for a synopsis. Um, So you need to remember the genre that you're working in. Do not forget what genre you are writing for. And why specifically, Gareth, is this so important to remember?
Well, quite frankly, I mean, the reason that synopses exist is that they're not going to read the book. Vast majority of the time, I'm
Right.
not going to sit and read the book off the bat.
Right.
And there's many, many reasons for that. Number one is, well, they want to know if the story and the characters and all that sound good to them
Hmm.
through a synopsis. Like, okay, well, if that story arc sounds real fun and there's interesting things going on, well, then I'll read the actual book and see if your writing is on point when it comes to that storytelling side of things. But similarly to that is, I may not be interested in certain genres right now. It's like I'm not placing those. So if you can tell me, just be honest, straight off, this is a romantic comedy, and I'm like, well, I'm only publishing sci-fi right now. I'm not going to waste my time.
Yeah. I would say too, keep in mind the genre as you're writing your synopsis. Also, make sure you're leaning into the elements of your book that deal with the genre, because especially if you have something that's a little bit of a twist or something like that, you just need to how they're going to sell it. So you need to make sure that whatever's that accessible genre level stuff is front and center. At least that's what I think.
That's
All
true.
right.
And you'll often find, I mean, the easiest way to remember this too is just the opening line of your synopsis. Title is a genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just be front and center about it. All right, make it short enough. So you don't want to make your synopsis too long. So what would be too long, Gareth? You know, I can send a 10 page synopsis, right? And make sure I got all my details of every little subplot going on in my work. That sound good?
Yeah, well, this is one that you may see actually changing in guidelines too. The general kind of expectation is going to be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words. I've seen some saying around 900 at a max as well. It depends on who you're dealing with. If they do state, well, you have to go with that. I can see Michael in the comments been told about 300 to 700. You see, it can be really tough with people saying
Yeah.
exactly where it falls in. But you're usually looking somewhere between 500 and 1,000, or roughly 2 pages.
And you can't get the entire novel in a few words. Well, we'll get to that, Michael. Don't worry. We'll talk about that and how you fit that in. Yeah. So on the flip side, though, you want to make sure it's long enough that you're giving them enough of a view of the story. This is not the same thing as a query letter where it's just the hook or it's just the super high level satellite view to the point where it's like, the guy meets the girl, they have trouble, and then they get back together. Like you need more than that, because what they want to see is some of the execution of the elements as well. So that's why you said 500 to 1,000 words.
Yeah, it wouldn't really just say, well, let's just say title is a romantic comedy, which meets all the beats you might expect.
Yeah, right.
Our main character, Daniel, finds the girl, loses the girl, gets the girl, romance writer or readers will love it. Buy it,
Yeah,
please.
right.
That's not going to
Yeah,
work. So
right.
you have to find a kind of balance here. That's why we have these two different sins, which is making it too long and not making it long enough.
Yeah.
It's got to have all the right stuff in that kind of bracket. So again, up to about 1,000 words. But that's tough. It is
It
tough.
is. It is. I mean, yeah, I mean, you go on Wikipedia and look at synopsises, and sometimes they can't seem to do it, and they're trying to be as straightforward and non-emotionally attached, kind of writing, which we'll get to whether or not that's the right style to use. But it's hard, yeah, because especially if you have quite a complex plot, but you're just gonna have to be strategic about it and cut to the chase, maybe not mention every little subplot, things like that. But speaking of that kind of sort of detached emotional state, what you don't want to do is you don't want to make it into something that sounds like a marketing blurb. In other words, you're not really selling them on it as you would like a movie trailer or back copy of a book. This is more of a straightforward read of what takes place.
Yes, it's not when you're asked for a full synopsis, it is not something that's designed that I'm asking for or I'm expecting to hide anything from me or be designed to make me interested in reading. For example, if you had a little blurb in a query letter or something like that, those can be. They're shorter than a synopsis. They're designed to make me excited. Think of it like the blurb on the back of your book, which is designed to make a reader go, "Ooh, this sounds cool. I think I'll give this a look." No, your synopsis should be a full open door access to
Mhm.
everything that's in the story, including the ending. And if there are any kind of twists and turns in there. They should be in there. As Daniel said, we'll get to a couple of sins coming up here, because this is often what the problem, where the problem really brings its head up, because you're like, well, I need to, if I need to say everything that happens in the story so that this agent or this publisher can read this and fully understand everything that's going on, how can I possibly crush that into 700 or 800 words? You know,
Right.
that's not going to work. There are little tricks, little ways around it.
Yeah, for sure. And what you certainly don't want to do, this probably is obvious, but might as well state it. You certainly don't want to be like, and in a twist that nobody will expect, this happens, or something like that, or audiences will love this, or in a riveting scene of, you're not just, you're not describing it like, you're writing PR for yourself. You just write the material as it is. It doesn't mean make it emotionless, but there's a difference between writing it and trying to set the stage and kind of put the audience a little bit into the mood of what your story is like, and talking about your story in that kind of disconnected marketing way. Now, here's a question I do have. What do you think of comparisons within a synopsis? Like, if somebody's like, they meet whatever, kind of a whatever type, or they have a scene and it's kind of reminiscent of this. To me, that doesn't necessarily ring correct, but what would you say? I'm kind of
Are you
thinking.
saying in a scene such as you would have read in another work?
Uh-huh.
That, yeah, no, it feels like
Yeah.
wasting words, quite
It
frankly.
does, yeah, because it seems like it's apparent, right? Because if you're like, um, I'm just trying to give an example. It's like, if it's like a horror book, it's like the book begins with somebody isolated on the water and a monster drags them under, just like Jaws. It's like, you don't really need to say that. The person probably gets that it's similar. Not to mention, obviously, it doesn't sound very original, but yeah, I don't think that's sort of writing.
Yeah, and anyone who's gotten to the point, usually, of asking for the synopsis are going to be um, pre-informed of that kind of stuff, because by that point, it's likely that you've provided them already with something like a short query or a pitch or a log line, and that kind of thing is going to have those comparisons. It's, X book is, let's say, Jaws meets Star Wars, whatever
Yeah,
kind of combination there is there,
right,
but they will know ahead of that, so it's not really pertinent to the
right.
synopsis.
Right. It's kind of a show don't tell. Show them how it's like Star Wars, right? Demonstrate that. If that's what you're going for, give them make it come have that come out in the writing of the synopsis and what you're talking about. This was an interesting comment because they were thinking that a true synopsis was chapter by chapter in terms of format, and I would say that is not typically the case, because you might not even need to include a certain chapter in a synopsis, like in the same amount of space as another chapter. There might be a chapter where you have to give a lot about it, and the synopsis is like a setup chapter, and other ones that are more action that will be quickly summarized. So nobody does like, and also how many chapters are in the book is not really relevant. So I would say no, I wouldn't chapter by chapter. That doesn't sound right. What do you
No,
say?
it wouldn't be, and
Yeah.
generally by the rules of space. And again,
Right.
when you're
That's a
stuck with
lot of
so many
words
words,
getting used up.
yeah, trying to break it down chapter by chapter may be a sin that's coming up. Actually, that should be, or I think would be, a mindset you'll want to break from to really get a good, concise, strong synopsis down.
Oh wait, sorry. That was actually focus more on beats than chapter summaries. Yes, we may be talking about that, but I liked Jedi Sharks would be cool. You have a writing prompt from David R. And we have contests coming up. We have we'll talk about it a little bit later. A story beat one. Somebody can do story beats of Jedi Sharks, and oh, here we go. Look at that. What a great segue. Yes, our drop the beat challenge. I forgot this was the next slide. Yes, we're currently in the middle of the drop the beat challenge. In terms of, if you watched our little kickoff, which was last week, we talked about this contest, which involves us utilizing a beat sheet, which you can download on the website. And I'll give you the address for that in a moment, but it's autocrit.com/drop hyphen the hyphen beat hyphen challenge. And what we're looking for are people to go through their story beats and submit it, and we'll have a contest, and it'll be lots of fun. There's your little There you go. So, yeah. So if somebody wants to do a Jedi Shark Drop the Beat challenge, I'm not gonna say it gives you an advantage, but I am saying I would really love to read it. So, but you never know. It could work out well. All right. So let's go back to things that we want to do. We want to make sure we give a sense of the character journey, right? You don't want it to just be like, well, this happens and this happens and then this happens and this happens. You definitely want it to be clear as to how this impacts the characters along the way.
Indeed. There was one question I saw coming up. I don't want to miss it.
Oh, sure.
Was Matt, there we have, does it read like the book or do I change tense and point of view?
Ooh,
When it
that's a
comes
good
to
point.
a book synopsis, pretty much every single time it's going to be written in present tense. You will very rarely see anything different to that.
Right.
Certainly don't vary it up throughout the synopsis. That's going to be a really, really bad advertisement for the book.
Yeah.
So keep it solid, keep it solid, keep it present tense, and unfold what happens in the story. And which ties really into the sin here as well, is obviously give a sense of the character journey. And I do think that this can be really handy if you're kind of, when you write out the sequence of events that are happening throughout the story, and then you read the synopsis back to yourself, and it feels like there's just something missing, that it's not really grabbing you in the way that you thought it would, in terms of your main character, is try using a beat sheet, just like Daniel was showing there.
Yep. And there
But
is
when
one
I,
at that link. If you don't have one, you can go back to that link that we just showed you. Well, I could show
yep,
it to you.
grab one.
And yeah, you can grab ours. It's pretty good if I do say so myself. Although
And
I didn't even make it, Gareth made it.
this would be a character beat sheet. So using the same sheet, but for a slightly different reason. So rather than marking down each of these story beats in terms of the events that happen, you're marking down the emotional turns that these events cause in your main character as they're going through. So you can actually see their journey planned out right in front of you in terms of these beats. And that would help you then bring that into the synopsis a little as you're mentioning each of these things, so we can, as we read the synopsis, get an idea that, yeah, there's a real journey here, that this
Right.
is actually a strong story.
Right. And it's a way to because the difference between uh, Wikipedia synopsis or maybe even something like Cliff Notes or something, and writing is some of that showing the reaction, getting it's demonstrating what's going on. It's not just summarizing to the point where it just loses all of the flavor and all of the impact, right? You want to make sure you're getting across like what's the point of all of this. It's like, oh, all these really cool things are happening and it's a great fireworks display, but what's the audience taking away from that? And that's where you got to get back to the character, the character growth and how it relates to them individually. So do not miss out on that, or you might be giving a lot of short shrift to your story, because there's a lot of stories where you just think about what happens. It's not terribly interesting in comparison to the emotional stakes for the characters.
Yeah, I think that's important. It is probably one of the things, if you have joined us on a few live streams, you'll hear me harping on about quite a lot as well, is that a great story is a marriage of concept and character. So
Mhm.
while the events that are happening in the story can be really cool, and I might be reading a synopsis that tells me a load of really cool and surprising events, I'm like,
Right.
whoa, this sounds like a fun story. You really seal the deal if you can also imbue the character side in there as well.
Yes, yes. So let's just keep up with these questions. Should subplots be mentioned in a synopsis? That is a good question that I don't think there is a definitive answer, right? Because sometimes subplots, obviously, no subplot should ever feel superfluous in a story. However, you do have to, for the sake of space, not include, all of the richness of your work. However, sometimes getting rid of a subplot would just rob it of so much flavor that you really can't afford to do that. So I don't know. I don't think there's a definitive answer. What do you think,
Yeah,
Gareth?
it's not an exact science. It's a real difficult one because what I will usually do when I am running a synopsis, I noticed just Judy's comment there as well. Entered an award that asked for chapter by chapter. Bit of a nightmare. Oh
Whew.
yeah, I could I could assume. What I will actually do
Really?
when writing a synopsis is, yes, I would actually start by planning it out chapter by chapter or laying it out chapter by chapter, and then start editing that writing to within an inch of oblivion. I'm just cutting this and this and this and this, trying to get it down below or as close to around 1,000 as it can, and then start looking for subplots. Is at that point I like to include them, especially if they mean something, if they are meaningful, because remember, subplots can usually be very meaningful explorations for side characters, especially if they are going to grow in their own arc, learn something, and then bring that back into the finale of the story. Well, then that's really integral, and you don't want to lose that. I hate to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's usually the last thing I will go for. I'll trim it all the way down, and then finally I'm just like, okay, I've got to start taking subplots out here,
Right.
but try to keep the most important ones. As I said, it's not an
Mm-hmm.
exact science, and it can be
Right.
frustrating as anything, but you got to do it.
Yeah. I mean, well, if you've done your job, like I said, it's not like anything should have gone or it wouldn't be in your book in the first place, right? So you're
That's why it
just,
hurts.
yeah, it's like it's the best of the best. Just think of it that way, It's the best of the best. In terms of this question, if you have more than one character, do you go character by character, stay chronological? Chronological, but I would say is otherwise that's going to be very confusing if you get to the end. Unless, but here's the question: what about a story that doesn't tell its story chronologically? I would say you're probably going to often match what the audience is experiencing, because often the reason why a writer's doing out of chronological events is because they don't want audiences to know certain details and so certain points, and you probably want that to kind of unfold in a synopsis. However, I have read synopsis that don't do that because there's stuff going on simultaneously. So I don't know. That's a challenge. Like, what if you were doing like Lord of the Rings, which I mean, that's just an example I could think of where literally it's like a story and then it stops and then it's like a story stops. I guess in that situation, you would do it character by character, right?
Yeah, likely. In most cases, again, there'll always be leeway depending on, some nuances, depending on what way the story is actually working. But in the vast majority of cases, it's going to be chronological. The synopsis, I mean, the best way to think about it really is a condensed summary of the experience of the story. And if the audience is starting at this point and then they're going through these beats to the end, that's the order it unfolds in the synopsis. It's to make me feel, when I've gotten to the end of that summary, that I have kind of read the story, that I've experienced the story in some small way.
Right.
And then if I'm interested enough, if that made me happy enough, I read that and thought, okay, this actually feels really involving and cool. I'm going to go read the book. And that's
Right.
at a point, because remember, you're talking to an agent, you're talking to someone who's a professional representative for you. They're looking to promote you as a product. Again, publishers on the same side, they're printing your book because they expect to make money from it. So by the point that they have gone past your synopsis and thought, okay, I will actually read the book, at that point, they're not really getting into the book to experience the story. They expect to have already done that with the synopsis. They're looking at your writing and going, is this good enough? Is
Right.
this strong enough? Do I think I can promote this or help this person enough to really excel? So think of it that way. The synopsis is literally a very, very short representation of that experience.
Yeah. Did you execute? This is an interesting question. At what stage of the writing process would you write a synopsis? And I would say it depends on your writing. I know I love answering like this, but it depends on your writing process, because I know people that are such deliberate planners and outliners, what George R. Martin calls the architect type, that basically they write more than a synopsis before they even get started, because they have quite a thorough outline as to what they're going to do. However, there are lots of people that like to start from a premise and just like to grow organically. And so obviously it's not until they're done and they've rewritten and they've edited and they've developed edited and they've done all of that that they even know what the story is, because it starts out as something that they have to carve, right? So it's not until they got that finished product that they can talk about what it was. So
Yeah, very, very fluid and personal process there. I think fits different people. Certainly in the world of screenwriting, you'll find a lot of people will write a complete treatment
mm,
before sitting down to write the actual script. And a treatment is more or less a synopsis, but bigger. It's actually going into scene by scene stuff. I think as
right.
some people mentioned here, kind of doing them chapter by chapter, you could consider that a treatment. It's breaking down the entire thing scene by scene and then sit down and write the actual screenplay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I do know that when you're an author, sometimes you may be asked for synopsis of works that you haven't made yet, or summaries or things like that. Although we just we just had an author on that's like, yeah, I do them, but I just completely change them anyway. So, like we said, it's part of the process. So,
That's
uh,
best laid plans.
right. All right, include the proper amount of detail. This is probably, it's like easier said than done, but it is important that you neither pull back so high level that you're not giving the audience, which is the agent or publisher, the sense of the flavor, the little the little elements that make your story work, that it's not just completely down to that the bone level. Because let's be honest, at the bone level, we talk about it here all the time. At the bone level, stories look pretty similar to each other. There's only so many different story plots. Like, at the bone level, your story is probably a tragedy or a comedy or a whatever, rags to riches or whatever it is. So you need to include more meat on the bone so you can understand what's distinctive about your version of that story that people have heard before, basically.
Indeed, and it's whatever is most unique and most relevant to the story. Find those little things. It could be as much as the main character's job. If
Hmm.
that is
Right.
core to the story, well, then your description or your intro to that character is legal advisor X, whatever their name. So make sure
Right.
you get that detail in, because otherwise you're just writing out a story, a story archetype, more or less. You're
Right.
not filling it with
Right.
the unique details that make yours stand out.
Right. Especially if you're writing in a genre that's maybe a little bit more tropey, like, romance or like a creature feature sort of thing. Like those are genres where there's just a lot of genre expectations. And so everybody knows you kind of get that stuff out of the way. And there's nothing wrong with it because that's what the audience wants. But it's what you're bringing to it, your particular spin or take on it, that is going to make you stand out. So make sure you include all of that. I was just trying to keep up with questions, but we'll keep going. Keep the writing clear. Yes, please do not be confusing. This can really easily happen when I've read synopses that are just trying to put in way too much information, because it's like, well, it's like when people tell you a story and they do a really lousy job and they're just including all this information that doesn't matter. Like, oh yeah, I was going to the grocery store, that one down the street, the one that replaced that other one that I didn't really like very much. Well, anyway, at that grocery store, I was parking my car, and you know how I always like to park the car. So you can see where this is a problem when ultimately I'm going to get to a story about how, I don't know, I couldn't find any milk because of shipping problems or something. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm including all of this stuff that doesn't matter. And the more you do like that, the more you get to the point where you can lose the thread of the story. It will lose their interest. It's just poor.
It is. Things can get very muddled before you know it. This is kind of what I mentioned as well about you can start with a really, really long, like I'm just laying everything out here, and then start editing it down. That's usually how I'll work with a synopsis. It's everything on the page, and then we're cutting it back. And well, paring it down, think of it that way. And when you're packing all this information in, for example, we don't need to necessarily have every single character's name mentioned in there that appears in the whole
No.
book. So you're going to start stripping it back to the core characters, who are the ones that really matter to everything
Yeah.
intrinsically. Now we're moving through our primary beats, and maybe, oh, look, there was enough space to mention that subplot. So that's fantastic. And then we're getting to the end of the story. You can often find when you are trying to keep everything while still editing it down to fit the space, that stuff starts to become way too packed in.
Yeah.
And anyone reading it, it loses clarity. It loses a lot of clarity. And the last thing, again, that's not going to be a very, very great advertisement for. Remember what I said, they're going to read the synopsis for that story experience and then look at your book for your writing. Is if the writing in the synopsis is confusing and unclear, that's not going to bode well for looking at the book itself.
Hmm.
So you don't want to set those bad expectations from the beginning. So it really is just spending the time editing it, making sure everything flows and still has enough in there. And that's why it's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point about proper nouns, like obviously if you're writing a fantasy that's got, a cast of 30, 40 characters or something throughout the whole book, obviously the more you include, the less headspace somebody's going to have in that short period of time in order to absorb it, process it, remember it for future reference. It's really like the ultimate info dump, which obviously that's ultimately what you're doing, in terms of you're trying to give them the whole story, but it's just too much exposition about the story that's not relevant, because you don't need to know the king's name of this place or the knight's name. You can just refer to them in common nouns, just for clarity, just to get them through the first time around.
Yeah, I mean, that could be one thing to think of. There is a really, really great example of how you could condense things down. Let's say there's a part of your book, like a huge section in the middle, where your main character runs up against the ruling class or whatever of this kingdom and actually fights against them, and has to then escape after the army bears down on them and things like that. You don't have the space to lay all of that out in terms of what happens. Instead, it's a
No.
sentence or two. In the kingdom of X,
Yeah.
character butts heads with the ruling class and has to escape.
Right.
It's that simple. You really, really summarize.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, and especially for anything that's like kind of side questy, just to build up the character stuff, you're not necessarily need to go into all the detail of the richness of things like that. You can hint at it. It's like, he goes to this cool place, he does this in order to learn this skill, and then he moves on with the journey or something. But if you spend too much time on that sort of stuff, then again, it can get unclear, because remember, just like writing prose, the more time you spend on something, the more important it appears. So you certainly want to be careful that you don't spend too much time explaining something that is not that central to your story, because it's going to just lead them astray. They're going to be like, wow, they're really talking about this sword an awful lot. Like, it must really come into play. And then it's just not. It's just you wanted to make sure they know how cool your details are. That's probably not the right detail. All right. Oh, this is a good one. What if your story falls into multi-genre? Do you stick with the main genre? This would be why multi-genre stuff is very tricky to sell and get published, but not impossible. But I will say, what you generally find in multi-genre stuff is that there's still that the greater of the genre. I believe. I guess somebody's probably going to give me an example in the chat. Go ahead, prove me wrong. But I think most of the time you can point to one of the two. If it's a mashup, was the stronger. So if it's like a horror comedy, it's either more comedic or more horror. And I would say, at the point in which they're asking for it, you probably should have an idea of who your audience was and lean into it, but also lean into whatever is the primary genre of your book. At least that's what I would say. What do you say, Gareth?
Yeah, and you'll usually find as well. This is a little tip thing that I've always found throughout the years, is that the prevailing genre usually comes second in the title. So if you're referring to a horror comedy, it's primarily a comedy. If it's a comedy horror, it's primarily horror.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
and putting it in that way
Mm,
is good if you're multi-genre. A lot of the time, too, though, advice that I have heard is if you literally don't know what the genre is, don't trip yourself up, leave it out. That's the only
oh,
instance in which I would say do not
interesting.
lead with the genre if you
Mm,
really just don't know. Although I think you've got other problems on your hands if you really just don't
yeah,
know at that
right.
point where it's falling in. Um,
Yeah.
so you could say, this book is X title is a dark sci-fi. It could be a sci-fi that has horror elements, but if you don't really want to say sci-fi horror, you can say dark sci-fi. Then they expect that there will be darker themes and things going on in the story that could
Right.
broach horror. So you can be smart about it. But when it's multi-genre, yeah, just mention it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would be probably at an earlier stage where you would be bringing that up. Not to mention, it would come out in your. If it's really a true mashup, then you can't even talk about it at a high level without it being obvious that there's a mashup going on. Otherwise, it's just like you got a little bit of flavor in there, and that's not really that big of a deal. You're certainly going to focus on the primary genre at that point. All right. Keep your voice. Yes. Uh, do not. Your goal is not to sound like a Wikipedia or a Cliff Notes version of your story. You do still want to keep the voice of yourself. How do you like to phrase things? Try to keep that through. And also, maybe even a little bit more is kind of the voice of the book. I think of like the tone of the book, the feeling. Because to Garrett's point, this is like you're giving them a little sneak peek at the audience's experience, right? So you're trying to give them that a taste of what it's going to be like when they absorb the whole work.
Yeah, there's a sense there within your synopsis and the way you write it. Again, this is something that you may want to uh, kind of pepper or sprinkle in there at the end. As I said, if you're starting with a real long kind of breakdown and then you're editing or paring that down into something smaller and you've got that within a decent word count that you're sort of happy with and all the main elements are there, and you've checked now that your character arc is really prevalent in there and you can see that, you can feel that experience and that growth, is to then find your voice and make sure that's in there, because you don't want the synopsis to read really like it's holding people at arm's length and very cold. Make sure that it has a sense of the tone of the book. So if you are writing a horror, well, you're going to want to have a few horrific words in there that are, things like gruesome or, a gruesome discovery and stuff like that. If you're writing with a comedic bent, well, then you want to give it a bit of pep. Make sure it has a bit of a funny tone to it. Something that matches the way the book reads. For example, you wouldn't read a Terry Pratchett synopsis and not crack a smile. Like, really?
Right. Right.
It's got to be in there, and
Right.
try to work that in, and it really makes your synopsis stand out. So it's not just so formal that it's bland. Make sure that I get a feel. This is kind of like summarizing the whole thing of a synopsis, like I said earlier, of it being a condensed experience. Like, I have read the book. Of course, I haven't, but you know what I mean. And that comes with many, many things. And as we said, that includes the story events, that includes the character growth and character arcs, and also your voice. What's the tone? How is it?
Oh, and we could certainly think of movie trailers that have gone different directions. Like, we've seen it and we're like, I don't really think I'm going to like that movie at all. And then we see the movie and like, oh, this is great, or vice versa. And often it's because the tone didn't match the work. And they had their marketing reasons why they did that. But, I would recommend trying to market your book correctly. Market your book as your book as it is. So, to Gareth's point, if it has a lighthearted tone throughout and you have all these fun little snarky details and things like that, bring that out in your synopsis. Don't just be so totally detached. You get into a little bit of that authorial narrative voice, and things like that. You don't you the last thing you want to is for the voice of your synopsis to catch somebody's eye and like, oh wow, and then they get to it and it's like, well, this wasn't what I was expecting at all, right? So you don't want that either. You want it to
Yeah, I guess if your synopsis comes across as really sort of businesslike and flat, I would refer to that as flat. Some people may enjoy it, that they're looking at it and thinking that it sounds like, oh, this is a super serious legal thriller by the way the synopsis, and then they get in and it's actually quite wacky and off the wall. You're not presenting things correctly. So just make sure that tone, that voice is actually in there.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a question: if your book is a mystery, do you need to worry about spoilers? No, because spoilers do not. There's no spoilers in synopsis, but yeah, the spoilers are not a thing. They're actually they're. It's not spoiling it for them. That's actually what they want. They want to know everything, and especially mystery. Not only is it not a spoiler, it's absolutely essential because mystery genre is based on what some people call information plots, where the audience is trying to figure out, what's happening next, and it's the puzzle that is part of it. So they need to know, how did you land that puzzle? What are the clues? As they read it, they might even try to solve the mystery. Granted, they may not have enough time in that short period to figure it out, but they'll want to be able to see the logic of how an audience member could have seen the clues and solved the mystery themselves.
Yeah, in a mystery and a whodunit, that kind of thing, those twists are the story. Yep. And your synopsis should include the whole story. There's no such thing as spoilers in a synopsis.
Nope. Spoilers are not a thing. I'm trying to think of what's the opposite of a spoiler. It's like I don't know. Because it's like, whatever it is, that's what it is. It's not, because it's exactly what they want. It doesn't spoil it. It doesn't spoil it. It actually is the thing,
Yeah. The intention of the synopsis is to spoil the story.
Right, exactly, right. That's what you're doing. You are telling them everything, to the point where there are no surprises, in terms of the plot or even character, as much as you can get, as much as you have the space for. You throw it all out there. Because you want to throw them the best of the best. Why are you going to hide anything from them? Because it's not a good strategy. Um, it's not like they're gonna read your book after they read the synopsis and be like, "Oh well, I didn't expect you would do that. I made it so much better." Like no, like that's not how it works.
And I can see Kat mentioning there, light bulb moments, those things, especially in a mystery, are all
Mhm.
things that should be there in the synopsis because those are the story beats of a mystery. That's really what you're doing in a synopsis. You're stripping down all those major story beats and laying them out, plain as day. The main problem comes when you got to edit it right down to a little small area, a couple of pages.
I love it from David R. Yes, the opposite of spoiled is refrigerated, but not as not applicable to the situation. This is what happens when you ask writers vocabulary questions. You take things so literally, everyone. Headline, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, it's your headline. Yes, good job. Uh, I like this. My wife and I think my wife friends think of me as a spoiler when I tell the end of a movie, so I guess I do understand the synopsis. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
that would be the imagine having that. That'd be the worst hobby ever. You call yourself the synopsis man and just walk around telling everybody what happens in stories.
See, I have the problem where because from all the research I've done and everything, that I often know what plot I'm in. So I'm like, oh, and so often I'll just out loud be like, oh yeah, this is totally gonna happen, and then it'll happen. They're like, Daniel, and I'm like, well, I just had an inkling. I mean, that's how these stories go. Like, of course, that also means though when I do it, and then the writer's ahead of me, and they pull a little switcheroo, which is fun. I'm like, wait a minute. It's
Yeah, I like to do that in all the thrillers where we have the mentor character, like action thrillers, and you're like, oh
uh,
well, they're gonna turn turncoat. There's obvious betrayal coming,
yeah,
and then
right.
they don't do it. It's like, oh,
Yeah, right. I think Ratatouille really did that for me with the whole plot of the owner's son and the contract. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be one of those ticking clock stories, and then the last minute they're gonna have to get the contract, all that, and then they just deal with that character like immediately, and I'm like, I don't even know what the story's about anymore. I'm so confused. Uh, so it was really cool. All right. Anyway, I digress. This is kind of a technical point, but this is something that people have brought up that I've seen, and that is if they're asking for an attached file, first of all, follow the guidelines if they want it in the email or if they want it attached. But if they are asking for it attached, try to be smart with the way that you name it. They may not give you a specific guideline on this, but just don't be like, gibberish or no vowels, or like try to be smart about it, and also make sure you put the title of the synopsis in that document too, because remember they could get barraged with a lot of material, so whatever that will let them keep it organized is for your benefit, but kind of a
yeah, that's
technical
true. You'll often find as well if your book has a long title, if it's 4 or 5 words in a file name, you may abbreviate that, then
Mhm.
dash synopsis and send it over. But if you then don't have the full title of the book inside that file, they may open that and they be like, I don't know what I'm dealing with. What's the title?
Everyone's going with Synopsis Man, the superhero from History Man, the writer's superhero. Yes, we only need a character. We need Otto with the big S, and he could be Synopsis. I don't know. We could get away with S because of DC Comics. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We might have Otto as Synopsis Man one of these days. If asked for a query, first chapter, a bio, and a synopsis, what should be the order of your submission? Wow, you're very popular, Michael. That's a lot of information they're asking from you. Make sure you include us in the acknowledgments. But anyway, Gareth, what would you say?
It depends on what you're asked for. If somebody is asking for all of these simultaneously, I would send them all at the same time.
Yeah, like as
If that's
one.
what the question means,
Yeah, it's like one
I
thing, I
would
would think.
I would usually
Because
attach
queries
them.
often have bios in them anyway. So then I would think, would you? I don't know about it. I know sometimes attaching is like a no-no because of spam filters and stuff like that, but I don't know.
Yeah, it depends on what they ask. If they were to ask, and if you're, I mean, with people asking for these things too, if you're ever unsure, because some of the people I know would want these as individual files. It's like, I want to file an attachment with your query, an attachment with your first chapter, an attachment with your bio, an attachment with a synopsis. Some will want the query bio and synopsis in inside the body of the email with the first chapter attached as a document.
Yeah.
It's all in the air. If somebody asks you for all of these things, don't be afraid to email back and say, how would you like it? Would you like certain bits in the body of the email and something as an attachment? That's not a problem. I mean, most people will hear that and go, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't tell you. Yeah, put these in the body, send me this as a file, or send them all as files, or whatever. Just ask.
Yeah. I would say though that would be pretty abnormal to be asked for all those things at once. So maybe a theoretical question. If not, I would say, Michael, you're popular. Good job.
Yeah, if you ask for all of those in one go, you're in for a bit of a shot there, I think.
Oh, apparently Elizabeth's been asked for all four as well. Wow, that's really interesting. Interesting. I like this. My husband is synopsis man. He will tell me everything he did to troubleshoot an IT problems or everything that happened today, even things I was present to witness. Yes. It's like somebody who just monologues about nothing. I think that's great. That's awesome. Sometimes I feel like that too. I just like yeah. Anyway, one thing that I do want to mention is that if any of you would like help with things dealing with agents like synopsises, things like that, we do have our perfect pitch appraisal, which is on our author services website on AutoCrit. Gareth, do you want to speak to perfect pitch appraisal a little bit?
Oh, well, I think it involves pretty much everything to do with the pitch and things that you could be asked for. I can see Philip in the comments that, yeah, a lot of agents use query tracker forms. And those are pretty standard. They will as well, yeah. If the agent's website actually has a form asking you to put things into it, do that.
Yes, follow the
It's always
guidelines. They're not
what they expect
guidelines,
of you.
they're
Yeah, right back to the
laws.
first one. Follow their
They're
guidelines.
commandments written written on your skull. Like
They are. Do not be a guideline sinner. I think is probably number one that glows above all else.
yeah.
But yeah, the AutoCrit Perfect Pitch Appraisal, as Daniel says, you can find that on the website under the Author Services banner. A few of the things we do hands-on as a team, and it involves covering everything involved in a pitch. So pretty much those four that you can be asked for. We've got to cover your synopsis, your query letter, have a look at the writing in your first chapter as well, whatever you may be asked to send. And of course a bio. So any ancillary things too that you would expect to submit, we can take a look at for you and tell you whether they are relevant. I know sometimes in a pitch package you may be like, okay, well I've got my cover and I've got this and this and this other thing. There's a lot of stuff that you aren't usually asked for. We can check those and go, you don't really want to send that in,
Yeah.
or that's really standing out. So yeah, you might want to include that. It all depends, but yeah, it's an excellent service. If any of you have something finished and you're getting ready to put it out into the world and wondering if your query is really, kicking as hard as it could, and of course the synopsis as we're going through here, because that's the dreaded edit, I like to call it, and we can certainly help with those.
Yep, and that would be found at autocrit.com slash author dash services. And I'm also putting it in the chat, and we'll also put it in the comments or the description below when this whole thing is done. So for those of you watching it on the replay, you'll get that link on there as well. But
There was a
oh yeah,
question
go ahead.
I think
Yes,
we may have missed here.
sure. Thank you, Gareth.
Well, if you're writing a book series, do you do a synopsis of
Ooh,
all of the storyline, or a synopsis book by book?
that is a
Uh,
really good question.
book by book. The synopsis is for a book.
Yes.
Simple.
And I would say you might be asked for the whole series, in which case I would think, and you're probably you're correct me if I'm wrong. I would think that the expectation would be the synopsis will be longer because you have to have enough. I don't think they're going or is it something where you need to do all however many books in 1,000 words?
It will be longer, and there'll usually be individual synopses that you're writing
That's
to
what I
that
thought.
same kind of length, and
Right.
just delineate by book one, book two, book three.
Yeah.
I'd give a synopsis of the book, because again, it's about like, think of. I just bought a bunch of them that I found for a really great bargain recently, but Stephen King's Dark Tower books. It's a gigantic series, and you want to know that the individual book that you're holding in your hands is a story arc in itself, is telling a story, has a story to tell. So they should be broken up or delineated by book one, book two, book three, and I can read that and feel like I read that book.
Right. Yeah, because I would think in the context of the series, again, they want it's just like everything else. They want that audience experience of what it would be like to go through the whole series. And This would be in the context where you have the books probably done or close to it. Although I suppose they might be asking for it as a plan, and then you can decide whether or not you follow it based on what I've seen. But
Well, yeah, I guess at that point, things can be up in the air occasionally.
probably
Jeanette,
depends on the editor and the publisher, to be honest.
a good question. Are there issues that the book ends up slightly different from your synopsis
Oh,
if you
see,
wrote
that
it
was
and
kind of
made a
what I was
change in
talking
editing?
about.
Yep. Is this a doc you have to update a lot? It will be. I refuse to write a synopsis until I'm finished with the book, quite frankly.
Yeah,
And if you do make changes based on feedback, if you've been sending it out with that synopsis and some editors or agents have said, I like it, can't represent it, can't do anything with it right now, but I think you should change some of this or whatever. And you do make those changes, you're going to have to edit the synopsis. It should match what's going on in the book by the time you submit it, if you know what I mean.
yeah. Here's another good question. How do you bring up the idea that you're writing a series without sounding presumptuous? Because isn't it just so arrogant to say you're writing a series? Actually, no, it's not. Everybody understands that some stories need length and need extra books. And to be honest, in some genres, that's exactly what they're looking for. Because think of it this way. Let's say that you write this masterpiece book and they want to throw all of this money behind it because you're going to be the next big thing. Well, what's easy for them to do next is to tell everybody, hey, you loved this next big thing. Here's the next big thing. And that's a lot easier than something completely new, right? Even from the same author. You know, you can think of examples of authors that have had really successful series and then write other series, and they're maybe successful, but they're just not at that fever pitch level, right? So absolutely, it is okay to mention the fact that it is a series, and in some genres it might be to your benefit. At least that's
Yeah,
my opinion.
it's generally recommended if it's part of a series that you do let them know that it's part of a series. Where that will normally come up, I just saw Kat commenting there. Yeah, perfect. By the time you get to sending the synopsis, they should already know this because it's going to be part of your query. You're going to let them know that it's a series.
Right.
However, again, the real world doesn't always work to strict processes all the time. So there could be a chance that you're just asked for a synopsis before you've even had that discussion. It's like, okay, well, send me a synopsis. In which case, if they've never seen it before, just make sure it's in the first line there along with the genre. So you could say book title is the first in a epic sci-fi series or epic fantasy series. And then go on to say what unfold the rest of the story in the synopsis. So you just start with that little bit. Yeah, it's a part of a series.
Yeah. Yeah, and there may be people that aren't looking for series, but there are people that are looking for series. Do not assume it's a liability that you're pitching a series. It's fine. Let's see. Anything else we got? I don't think so. So I'll just do another shout out because this is not the only live stream we're going to be doing this week. We already mentioned it before, but I will be back on Friday to kick off the entries for the Drop the Beat challenge. So check it out Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be starting that contest in earnest, and it's just going to be so much fun. I'm really looking forward to it, to be honest. Just to see the material, because I think it's such an interesting creative process, and it really does speak to what we were talking about today. So if you feel like you're a little bit stuck on your synopsis, one thing you might do is actually check out that beat sheet on there, because it might give you a starting place for writing your synopsis, because it's a really good outline to let you know all those beats, all those important moments that come up in a story.
Yeah, it's a super fun way and real easy to break those beats down. Okay, I said easy. It's not easy. Nothing's ever easy in this field, but it's a really good way to break it down, like we said earlier. So if you're struggling with your synopses as well, just whacking it all in a beat sheet might actually help you figure that out, what needs to go on there.
I love it. Drop the mic. Well, I mean, I could take this headset off, but that really would be very fast. Like, yeah. But yes, it's going to be fun. Rewritten it four times already. Awesome. Yes. Sometimes it's the little things that are more challenging, right? It's like poetry. Poetry can be so challenging because you're trying to get so much in a little space. Sometimes when you challenge yourself to summarize in a small space, it's quite difficult. That is for sure. All right, Gareth, anything else that you want to bring up or talk about regarding synopsis or the beat challenge or anything?
I just want to draw attention to Bruce's comment. He's
I
got
had a feeling you would. That is so up your alley. Yes,
he's got
Garrett's our horror
a beat
person.
sheet in his rec room. I think the wrong kind of beat sheet. I'll get you arrested. Yeah, everything's quite clear. If you have already registered for the Drop the Beat challenge, of course, the stream on Friday will be answering any final questions, walking you through the submission process, what we're looking for, and what you can do. Notice that some people did reach out to say that the editable PDF with their tech couldn't save it and that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that on Friday. It's not the only way you'll be able to submit. And if you are registered, watch out for an email arriving, I believe, tomorrow, which will have the submission link for you, so you can actually start submitting from tomorrow. Just so you know, so that'll hit your inbox.
So you get a little jump start on those who are going to join us live on Friday. That's awesome.
Like, see, Philip, if I could tell my story in 2 pages, I wouldn't have written a whole book. Yeah, that's why I think.
That's like it's like painful and true and like wow, yeah.
Yeah, like anybody who's written or is writing synopses for a living probably has no hair left, quite frankly.
Right. Well, it's honestly why probably one of the reasons why, too much directors' chagrin, they'll never let them make their own movie trailers, because it's a different skill set to some extent. You are gonna have to put on a little bit of a different hat, and to some degree, it's a painful one, because it's like I didn't set out to become a Cliff Notes writer. That's true, but
yeah, absolutely,
it is what it is. It is what it is. All right, so thank you so much. We will see you again live Friday, so be there, or be square, as they like to say. And I'll see you around. Thanks you, Gareth, and bye, everybody.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye, all.